Hey, good morning, everybody. Well, it's a cup of coffee. Pastor Tom with you. We're on week 2 of our series, Trust the King. Last week, we talked about hearing a word from God and the truth of every word of God is pure out of Proverbs, but sometimes our filter is dirty, so when we hear it, things attach itself to it, not to take us too far out of the spiritual realm. And anyway, you can get attachments to it, and then you need to trust God, which means take refuge in Him till He filters that out so that what you heard and what He said are the same thing. This week, we're going to talk about being in that tower and the mind games that Satan plays. Because when I submit a word to God, it's like Satan touches my watch and burns a hole in my skin, and all I can think about is how long is this going to take? I got to do it now. Let me tell you something I learned from a non-godly man. Anything you have to do today probably isn't the right thing to do. And so there is an element of wisdom that has to guard my faith. Not fear, wisdom, okay? Why is that? Because if I walk outside of wisdom, then I'm walking out of step and outside of the will of God. You read Proverbs, it's all through there. Wisdom, it calls. You stand at the door and you wait for wisdom. In the New Testament, it says, if you ask for wisdom, I'll give it to you. The key is I have to wait till it shows up. And trust me, you'll know it when it shows up. So you're in this tower of trust, but sometimes you feel like a prisoner because the one that you're trusting is not bound to your timeline, and nor does he want to be, because he knows way better than what I know, and he knows how he wants to use this way more than I can understand. I'm going to give you some biblical reference for that. But one of the things, the mind games, is Satan will begin to mock the timing of God, try to provoke you to get out of the tower of trust and to begin to do it in your own way and in your own time. And Galatians 6:7 says this, do not be deceived, God is not mocked, for whatever a man sows, he will also reap. For he who sows to the flesh will reap of the flesh corruption, but he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. Now, you could easily look at that and say, that's sin, and I'm not sinning. Well, anytime I miss the mark, that's what sin means. I am sinning. I'm sowing to my flesh. And the minute I step out of the tower because of the mind games of Satan, I begin sowing to the flesh. What I've already sown, though, is by the Spirit getting into the tower and trusting the King. That sows something in the Spirit. And so God isn't mocked. What that means is He's going to bring a harvest based on what I sow. And so if I've sown in the spirit of trust, then what it's going to reap is an action on God's behalf. So what God says in verse 9, let us not grow weary while well doing good, for in due season we will reap. That's the key. You have to trust Him for the due season. You cannot manufacture the due season. I don't care if you have a farmer's almanac. I don't care if you have the best watch that was ever invented on the face of the earth. I don't care if you have the best GPS that was ever invented and you know exactly where you are and exactly where you should be and how long it's supposed to take you. Chuck it out. I can't tell you how many times I've sat in service in the early years and God would tell me, take off your watch. This is my wisdom from somebody that's walked it. Get rid of your calendar, take off your watch, stop counting your birthdays, and stay in the tower of trust because you serve a God who is not going to be mocked. He is going to bring an increase. He is going to bring an action to the trust that you show, to the seed that you sowed of trust by getting in the tower with Him. Next week, we're going to talk about what you do in the tower. But let me end today with a story from Esther. The man who raised her, Mordecai, did a favor for the king, kept him alive by exposing an assassination plot and got no reward. It wasn't until later when Mordecai was facing death by his arch enemy Haman that the king couldn't sleep. Wonder how that happened. It happened because God stirred him so he couldn't sleep. He hears the story of Mordecai. It says, did I ever give him a reward? They said, no. He gives him a reward. But listen, the reward that he got initially, having his enemy parade him around on a horse and declaring his goodness and getting to wearing the king's robes, wasn't what God was after. Because if you move along in the story, God had already set up what was going to happen to Haman. He was now setting up that Mordecai would be in the forefront of the king's mind when he hadn't been before. And when Esther did what Esther needed to do, and Haman is hung, she brings Mordecai in before the king, and the king gives all the favor from Haman to Mordecai. Why? Because Mordecai had sowed the seed of saving the king, and then he trusted the King of Kings to bring about the reward. And the reward was far greater than anything he could have manufactured on his own. I would guarantee you Mordecai could care less about being trotted around, sitting on a horse, sitting with royal robes, and having his chief enemy proclaim his goodness. How do I know that? Because he had just been in sackcloth and ashes crying out for a people. His heart was for the people. His heart was for the kingdom. God knew that. God saw that. And God rewarded him openly in a way that would impact the people, not just in a moment, but for generations. You see that at the end of the book of Esther. The last person mentioned in the book of Esther is Mordecai, and how much he did for the people of Israel. Hang on in the tower. Don't get out, because God is going to meet you there, take you out of there, and then cause you to be a blessing in the body of Christ for years and years and years and years and years. Trust the King. He's got you. If this meant something to you, please share it. You can find us again on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Rancho Christian Center, or our Second Cup of Coffee. Thank you for hanging out with us, and we'll talk to you soon.